Episode 3. The Pharaoh inside you, on frozen energy and the architecture of control. At some point in your life, maybe right now, maybe years ago, you came into contact with a system that could not be questioned. It might have been a family, an institution, a relationship, a version of yourself. The specific shape doesn't matter as much as the structure. The structure was, this is how things are. This is the order. And the order does not accept feedback from below. If you pushed back, the system didn't engage with your pushback. It absorbed it, redirected it, or punished it. But it didn't change. And here's what's fascinating about that kind of structure: it is never as strong as it appears. Because a structure that cannot receive feedback is already in the process of collapse. It just doesn't know it yet. Welcome back to MetaMind. I'm Jelani Garaui. Today we're talking about the Pharaoh. Not the historical one. The structural one. The one that lives inside every person who has ever confused their current position with their permanent identity. In the ancient texts, the Pharaoh is not primarily a villain. That's important to understand from the start. In the geometric reading, the reading we use in the MetaMind framework, the Pharaoh represents something that begins as a completely natural phenomenon. A center of concentration. In any field, whether we're talking about energy, or a social system, or a psyche, there are moments when things concentrate, gather, coalesce around a point. That's not a problem. That's how structure forms. The problem begins when the concentrated point refuses to acknowledge that it is temporary. When the center declares, "I am not a phase. I am the permanent order." In the Pharaoh's most famous line in the text, and this is one of the most structurally interesting sentences in all of ancient literature, he says, "I am your highest sovereign." And in the geometric reading, this sentence is not an expression of tyranny. It is an expression of a specific kind of energetic error. It is a partial pole claiming to be the total field. In the MetaMind framework, there are 4 signatures of what we call Pharaoh consciousness. I want you to listen to these carefully, because they're not limited to external systems. They appear inside people. They appear in the internal structures that run our lives without our awareness. Signature 1, the freezing of energy. In a healthy cycle, energy moves. A pattern emerges, does its work, and then recedes to allow a different pattern to come forward. Pharaoh consciousness refuses this movement. It attempts to fix the moment of its emergence permanently. It says, "This is how I am. This is how it will always be. I do not transform." In personal terms, this is the part of you that uses the same strategy for every problem, regardless of whether the strategy is working. That doubles down when challenged rather than adapting. That experiences genuine change as a threat rather than a passage. Signature 2, closed centrality. In a healthy structure, the center is provisional. It serves a function and can be moved. In Pharaoh consciousness, the center becomes a claim. The structure stops seeing itself as one direction within a larger field, and starts seeing the field as an extension of itself. In personal terms, this is the version of you that experiences other people's independence as a problem. That can't quite tolerate someone in your world being right in a way that doesn't require your permission. That interprets the existence of other valid perspectives as a diminishment rather than an expansion. Signature 3, the claim of control. This one is subtle, so stay with me. The claim is not "I want control." The claim is, "I am the source." The rejected pole in the text doesn't just say "I want to be in charge." It says "I am your highest sovereign." It redefines itself not as a representative of authority, but as the origin of it. In personal terms, this is the belief that your worth, your identity, your stability, all of it, comes from your own generation, your own effort, your own maintenance of the structure. It is the belief that if you stop holding it together, it will collapse. And therefore you cannot stop. And therefore you cannot change. Signature 4, the imprisonment of light. This is the most important one, and the hardest to see in yourself. Light, in the geometric reading, doesn't mean illumination in the spiritual sense. It means transmissibility. The capacity to let information, insight, and movement pass through you rather than stopping at you. A healthy structure is a channel. Input comes in, is processed, and passes forward. Pharaoh consciousness becomes a dam. Everything that enters, feedback, challenge, possibility, the recognition that something needs to change, gets absorbed and held. Not processed. Not passed forward. The person in Pharaoh consciousness is often described by people around them as someone who takes everything personally, who can't receive criticism, who, even when they intellectually agree that something needs to change, somehow never quite changes it. That's what imprisoned light looks like from the outside. Here's something that the text does that I find extraordinary. After the Pharaoh's collapse, the text does not simply say he died. It says something much stranger and more precise. It says, "This day we preserve you in your body, so that you may be a sign for those who come after." Now in the traditional reading, this is about the historical Pharaoh's body being preserved, possibly referring to mummification, possibly to something else. But in the geometric reading, what the text is describing is the specific physics of what happens when a structure refuses to move. It doesn't disappear. It freezes. The mass remains. The wave, the living movement, the capacity for change, the ability to transmit and receive, that's what dissolves. What's left is a body without motion. And the text says, let it be seen. Let it remain as a sign. Not as punishment. As information. Look at what happens when the pattern refuses to pass. I want you to think for a moment about the versions of Pharaoh consciousness in your own life that have played out to their conclusion. Not in other people. In yourself. The position you held for too long. The story you maintained past its usefulness. The version of yourself you kept defending even after you knew, quietly, that it was no longer true. What remained at the end of that? Most people, when they're honest, describe something like a heaviness. A preserved thing. A shape of themselves that was no longer alive but was still present. That's the geometric result the text is describing. Not moral failure. Energetic freezing. So what moves a Pharaoh structure? I want to be careful here, because this is where the framework is often misread. The movement does not come from the outside. From someone confronting you. From circumstances forcing a change. Those things can catalyze. But they don't do the structural work. What moves a Pharaoh structure is the recognition, which is usually quiet, usually unwanted, and usually arrives at the worst possible moment, that you are not the total field. That you are a position within a field that is larger than you. This recognition is not humility in the self-help sense. It's not about being meeker or more accommodating. It is a structural event. It is the moment when the partial pole recognizes its own partiality. And the strange thing is, once that recognition arrives, the frozen energy doesn't collapse. It releases. And release is very different from collapse. Collapse is what happens when the structure can no longer hold. Release is what happens when the structure finally allows itself to move again. In the next episode, we are going to turn the mirror around. We've been looking at the pattern of frozen energy, what we call the Pharaoh model. In episode 4, we look at the counterpole. The figure in the text who operates with what we call the geometry of release. A point that makes no claim. A word that owns nothing. A motion that does not seal itself. And we're going to talk about what it actually feels like, in concrete, daily terms, to move through the world from that position rather than from the Pharaoh position. If this episode landed somewhere real for you, if you heard yourself in one of the 4 signatures, there are 2 things that can help you go deeper. The first is the quiz at MetaMind. The quiz identifies not just which station you're in, but which specific dynamic within that station is most active for you. For a lot of people, episode 3 describes what they're moving through, and the quiz helps clarify what it's on the other side. The second is the book. The Crow principle lays out the full geometric analysis of all 11 layers, from the perception gap in episode 2 all the way through to what the text calls the convergence of the poles. It's available at MetaMind in the link below. I'm Jelani Garaui. This is MetaMind.